name is Michael. I'm an alcoholic. I have been sober since April 22nd of 2010. So I wasn't nervous till I just was called up here, and all of a sudden everything just went white. So we'll see what happens. Happy New Year. I'm glad to be here. I will tell you a little bit about my life. Most of it will be true. There will probably be a little bit of lying because I tend to lie a little bit, but not in my story. But just in general, I tend to exaggerate, I guess, and something I'm working on. So I don't know where this is going to go today, but we'll see what happens. So I will tell you, I never thought I was an alcoholic or an addict, but I was always a mess my whole life. And I attributed it to being like, I knew I was gay when I was really little, but growing up in Minnesota, it wasn't too cool in the 70s to probably be a homosexual in a town of 700 people. And so I just remember always being different. And I remember thinking like one of my favorite things to do when I was a kid would be like Annie across the street. She would come over to my house and bring all of her strawberry shortcakes, and we'd close our eyes and smell the different smells and try to figure out, oh, that's orange blossom, or that's strawberry shortcake, or apple dumpling, or whatever it is. And I remember that being like a lot of fun. And I remember like, I think I was turning 8 or 9, and I had gotten an Atari the year before, and I remember my dad I had opened up Frogger, and I remember being like, oh, yay, Frogger. And then my little sister got like a baby doll that like blew kisses, and I was super pumped. And you have to act like you aren't excited, but I just always knew I was different growing up. So I was born in a small town in Minnesota. I was born in a hospital called the Wiener Memorial. And that's kind of how my life was. Like, it was just I was always different. When I was really young, it was my dad, my mom, and my older sister. And my mom got sick when I was really young, like 3. And she had leukemia and passed away when I was 5. And so I can remember like playing outside, playing kickball when I was 5 years old, and my dad called us in and he was crying and he was like, your mom died. And I didn't think much of it. I just thought like, okay, can I go play kickball again? And that was it. Like, there was just really no emotion. And I think that's kind of how I've compartmentalized a lot of my life, and I didn't realize it. And so I can remember my dad being really sad when I was a kid. And I remember hearing like MASH downstairs, and I would be up, and I remember like hearing him cry. So every time I hear MASH now, or the TV show is on, I don't get emotional, but it's like a sad part of my life. I just don't like anything about MASH. And I remember Dad always going upstairs right after that, and maybe I was scared of the dark. And so that's what I remember. Like, I knew that at the end of MASH, you'd go upstairs, but I just always remember that just weird things as a kid. Like I tried to be a normal kid, but I can remember in 1984, like, there's nothing I wanted to do any more in my life than to become Mary Lou Retton. Like, that was my goal. I remember the Olympics, and I remember like just thinking, oh my gosh, like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. I'm going to be an Olympic gymnast. And I started gymnastics, and I was pretty good. I was really good at gymnastics, but like, my dad would put me in t-ball or baseball, and they'd always put me in center field because I would just be out there like doing cartwheels and picking up dandelions, and that was just my life. And I can say growing up, I was never like treated poorly, and my parents always treated me well. I was all my friends were cool, but I always felt more comfortable around girls. I think that's a lot of us probably did when we grew up. We traveled, by the time I was 8, my dad started dating a woman, and they decided to get married. And so this is my stepmom. I call her mom. She's my mom. She's been raising me since I was for 40 years now, So mom, and my little sister came along. So it's kind of like the Brady Bunch back in that, 1980. So it was my little sister, who's my stepsister, and my mom, and my older sister, and my dad, and I. And we just kind of made this, this new family. And I always remember, like, my little sister and I got along really, really well. And she was my stepsister. But I can always remember thinking, like, we'd sit in the same chair together and rock and watch TV, or, we'd come up with like little skits together, and we always got along really well. But my stepmom was, she was a lot younger than my dad. She was 28 and my dad was 40. And I can remember thinking like, man, she's mean. Like, my mom is mean, but I don't think she was mean. She just had really high expectations. And I can remember like being a typical kid, and my little sister was terrified of snakes. And I remember like having a picture of a snake on like a magazine, and I sat on her chest and peeled her eyes open and was like forcing her to look at the snake, and she was crying. And my mom came downstairs and started screaming and ran up to her room and was bawling. And I think back now, I'm like 28, like what's the maturity level of a 28-year-old is not great, And I remember my dad coming upstairs and saying to me, listen, if you're not a perfect son, you're going to lose another mother. And I'm going to reiterate this with, I don't know how, or I'm going to preface this with, I don't know how real that was, but that's what I heard. And so growing up my whole life, I always wanted to be this perfect kid. So, we moved a few times. I moved from Ballatin, Minnesota to a bigger town of 1,200 called Blooming Prairie, Minnesota. And the team mascot for the high school was the Awesome Blossom, and it was this black and gold flower, and he jumped around, and that was truly the mascot of the basketball and the football team. And I thought, oh, wow, this is unbelievable. Maybe I'll be a cheerleader. And then we moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota when I was in 6th grade. And I almost immediately felt a little bit different. And it's not like Sioux Falls is an amazing city, but it was like 75 or 80,000 people. And I think I just felt more comfortable in a larger city, even young, 6th grade. There were more kids to, hang out with. You could find different friends maybe that you couldn't in a little tiny town. And my life kind of was big in South Dakota. I mean, as big as it can be. I remember high school being fairly popular. I was up for homecoming and prom king, and I traveled around and put on like this crash test dummy outfit, and there was a girl with me, and we would play like tapes at elementary schools about like, don't do drugs and wear your seatbelt and all of this. And I had never once had a drink even in high school. I just remember always wanting to be this perfect kid. Like, that's what I remember over and over in my head. So I will tell you, like, school was not my thing. I've never been great with school, but I would do anything to get by. And that's like be chummy with the teachers. And I remember like my senior year of high school, my teacher was like, well, you got a 58 in this class, so I'm going to give you a C-. I'm like, okay. Like, to me, like, that was passing. And now I realize like that was just probably me being manipulative and getting my way. I don't ever remember really having a problem with alcohol, though, until later on in my life. And what I do remember, though, is my life constantly, like, I had things happen where I look back now and realize an addiction was just an addiction. So when I was younger, it was, it started out with I would purge all the time. So I was really big. I was big into bulimia. Oh, that sounds so crazy to say that, but I purged all the time. Then I was shopping all the time. Then I found like bookstores, and that's when I started to realize like, oh, this is truly fun. Like being, hanging out at bookstores and like tricking with people is fun, or cruising some parks or whatever it is. Like, that was exciting to me, and that was probably early college. And I can remember meeting a girl in college and starting to date Katie. And I feel so bad. I still feel bad. Like, she should have known, but it's not her fault. I pursued a girl, and we actually moved together and lived together for a little while. And I can remember like trying everything possible not to have sex. I can remember like I was always, I'm not feeling good, or let's do it tomorrow, or whatever it is. I just did not want to touch her. And I can honestly remember like kissing her once in the car, and she gave me the tongue, and I remember like gagging, and it was a visceral like reflex to a girl's tongue in my throat. And I still remember that to this day. Like, when we split up, I felt so scared because I knew I would probably never date anyone again, another girl. And I wasn't ready to admit that I was, into guys, but I just remember that so clearly and kind of being a little obsessive. And I hate to say I watched this show, but I watched, Coming Out Colton, not too long ago on Netflix. And I can kind of relate to him, like just wanting to be that perfect kid and not come out. And I just remember like kind of affecting her life and other people's lives. And it's interesting because I think back now, and when I finally came out, my parents, I had moved to Florida with a boyfriend. And so I met my first boyfriend in Bismarck, North Dakota. So I will tell you, like, I moved all over as a kid, and I can remember moving to Bismarck, North Dakota to manage a store at about 21 years old. And I met a guy, and he lived in Fargo, which was the big city. So I used to travel like 3 hours each way. We'd travel back and forth to see each other, and we decided to move to Minneapolis. And we lived in Minneapolis together for a while. And he was really abusive. He was extremely abusive, and I didn't realize it at the time. But he just treated me, he manipulated me, he treated me really poorly, and I just thought it was normal. And I think it's kind of like I wanted that structure. My parents were really strict with me growing up, and all of a sudden I met someone and he kind of treated me like crap. So I figured, well, that's just how life is. Like, you find someone that's going to like control you a little bit, and that's how life should be. And I can remember moving here. We moved to Florida for a while, and then moved up here. And I think about it, and we built a house in Florida, and my parents called me and said, "We're coming down to visit. Is there something you want to tell us?" And I said, "You mean that I'm gay?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're totally cool with it. We just wanted you to know we're okay with it." And I still had like this internalized homophobia, though, that I was not okay being gay. And so I just think I kind of hid from it. I didn't want to be open about it. And I remember moving, I would say my addiction starting to like morph into something different. So I went from like bulimia, still wasn't a big drinker, had smoked pot maybe twice my whole life. And I remember one time stealing money out of a register and thinking, oh my gosh, this is exciting and I can get away with this. I manage a store. And I remember thinking about it and realizing that it just became this habit. And I started to do it thinking like I could take money whenever I need it. And I was arrested for it maybe 6 months later. And I just remember being really, really ashamed about doing something so silly. And I had probation for a while and everything's fine now. But at the time, I was kind of mortified, and I didn't tell anyone. My partner knew, and that was it. And that was it. Like, I worked at a restaurant for a while, finally started working at another retail store, and moved to Dallas later on. But I mean, the whole situation lasted about 1.5 years, but I had all of this like anxiety built up. Like, what if the store that I work for, that I moved to Dallas for, finds out? I was always nervous. And we moved here, and my partner started to hang out with other people here, which is fine. Whatever. Do what you want to do if that's what you want. But all of a sudden it went to like, he'd call it date night, where he'd go out on a date night, which is just go sleep with someone else. And all of a sudden he'd start staying over at people's houses. And I was just like, just tell me it's over. And he did. And I turned to drinking. And when I turned to drinking, Like, I had never really been a drinker. I do remember in college, like, every time I drank, I would drink to like get drunk, but it was so few and far between. And then when I started dating this guy, he didn't drink much, so I just didn't drink. But I can't really ever remember in my life going to a bar and not getting drunk. So when all of a sudden I'm free and living in Dallas, in Oak Lawn, the first gay community I've ever lived in, and being free, I started going to the bars. And, I found camaraderie there, and I found like this community there, and I just turned to it. And I can remember like one of the first drugs are in my story. I'm sorry, but they are. And so addiction's addiction, alcoholism is that. And I remember going to the bar one night, and this guy, he was bald, and I was It was my thing at the time. I was really into ball guys. And I remember him like taking me aside later on. He's like, I just want you to know, like, before I met you, I did a bump. I'm like, that's all right. I've been looking at you. I bumped into you on purpose. And he's like, no. I did a bump. And I'm like, what do you mean? And so he pulls out this little baggie of cocaine or something. And I remember doing it. And that's the first time I can remember thinking like, wow, like not just the alcohol, but the drugs. Like, when's my next day off so I can go do the same thing again? And so alcohol turned into like a little bit of party drugs here and there, turned into like, 3 or 4 days going to the bars nonstop, drinking, using drugs, not sleeping, going to work. And my life spun out of control really, really fast when I got here. So that was early 2006. And from 2006 to like 2010, my life was beyond chaotic. So I built a townhome when I moved to Dallas, and within like a year of starting drugs, I had to sell my townhome because I just couldn't afford it anymore. And we had split up already, and we owned the place together, so he bought me out and I moved into this other place. And my life was insane. Have you ever been so like you can call it psychosis or whatever you want, but the drugs made me so crazy that I honestly can't differentiate what was real and wasn't real. Now that I think about it, I realize that there's a lot of things that weren't real. But I was the kind of person that like, I didn't have electricity for 3 months in some guy's condo that I had rented out for him, or had rented from him. And I remember not having electricity thinking that's normal. But then I realized that it was getting worse because I was still convinced there were like cameras in there. So I cut all the holes in this poor guy's walls and cut every wire in his walls. And then like woke up a couple of days later and realized, oh my gosh, like I had taken all my talcum powder and shook it in the air and was looking for laser beams. And that was my life. Like I was nuts. And I giggle about it now because it's so crazy, but like that was just one thing. Like I remember thinking like if I can just figure this all out, I'll win. I thought there was like a reality show going on. Those cameras were part of a reality show, and it was just about drug addicts trying to get sober. And for 4 years before my car got repossessed, for 4 years I used the toll roads every single day and didn't pay a single toll. Well, then how is it like a good alcoholic loses his job at a department store? So I thought, I'll just work at a leather bar. Well, I am not a leather bar kind of person. You can see me right now thinking this doesn't fit in with my lifestyle at all. But so I would be there, like I started out as a barback and then they moved me to bartending. So like the first day I would be pretty messed up and I'd be there, but I'd be flirting with everyone and people liked me and I was fun. And day 2, I was like skeptical of everyone and crying a little bit. And by day 3, it was like straight tears, like scared of everyone, thinking they were all in on it. And my life that's how it was for 2 years. It was just out of control. I ended up losing my driver's license. And the problem is when you've got $15,000 worth of tolls that you haven't paid, you have warrants. So how do you go get your driver's license when you've got warrants out for your arrest? So then it just got worse and I wasn't working. So I was just trying to like basically hide from the police. So I would never admit I was homeless at this time, but let's just say I didn't have an actual place to live. I'd stay with friends for a month or two till they were tired of me. Then I'd go stay with another friend for a month or two. And that's kind of how I lived for a good year. I can remember in those times, like, remember being at the bar one night and this gal walked in and I didn't realize who it was, but it was my cousin Tony. And Tony has more facial hair than I do. She's a Iowa girl through and through and like corn-fed and just, I don't know what's wrong with her, but she's a little crazy. And she walked in and she's like, I'm your cousin Tony. And I'm like, hi. And I was mortified because at that time I was hiding away from my parents. My parents didn't know where I was. I hadn't spoken to them for 14 months because I was just so embarrassed of what I'd become. So I didn't want them to know who I was. I can remember Tony's saying, your grandma died last month and your parents are worried about you. And if you ever want to get sober, or if you ever want help, they'd love to hear from you. And so like that, it was nice to hear, but I was not ready to get sober. I remember one night hanging out with a guy, and then like, I remember kind of coming to the next morning and seeing him in a mirror, like making weird noises and using a needle and like poking at worms coming out of his tongue, and there were no worms there. And I thought, this guy's crazy. But I hung out with him for another day. I didn't leave. And I remember him saying, let's go to a meeting tonight. And I thought, what meeting? And then I realized he took me to my first meeting. And I will tell you, like, I feel like if I would have wanted to get sober at the time, it would have been amazing. But for me, it was just a little adventure for a night. And I remember that was probably in 2008. And then I didn't go to another meeting for a couple of years. I can remember back in the day, Evan, little Evan, he and Didi Fuqua tried to help me. And I remember like walking out one day and there was a note on my door, and I thought, who are these people and what do they want from me? And I just didn't put two and two together that they were sober. And later on when I got sober, she had told me, like, we were there one day, we tried to help you. And so I know people had realized like I was a mess, but I just wasn't ready to get sober. First of all, the drugs helped me lose weight, and I've always had issues with my weight. I've never liked the way I look. I've never been confident. It felt me feel thin. It felt me feel more like everything. And I just thought it was amazing until probably a week later. After the first week, it really stopped. But by then, you're kind of hooked. So, I can remember being at the bar still, and the owner saying, please don't drink tonight. And my first thought is like, don't drink tonight. Like, I don't have a problem with alcohol. Like, I have a problem with drugs. That's what my thought was. And then I realized, like, no, because every time I'd be at the bar, I would drink, nonstop. And I realized as I'm, coming towards the end of all this, I just know that life has to change really quick. And it was awful. And I had lost the job at the bar. I didn't have a place to go. My roommate was kicking me out, and it was like right in December of 2009. And I tell you, this is such a romantic story. So I was walking around down by the bars one night, and that was one of the things I like to do. I didn't like to be around people, but I didn't want to be alone either. So I'd always want to like hook up with people or whatever. And I remember one night I was walking, and I remember this guy talking to me out behind like one of the bars on Cedar Springs. And he said, well, why don't we go to my house and we'll hang out? And I was like, okay. So I remember walking with him, and he's like, well, we have to climb over a fence and crawl through a window, but there's a lesbian that's there that will let us hang out with her and we can have some fun. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. And I remember walking with him down the street. And as I did, this man walked by me and was getting into his Jeep. And I thought, who is this? And as I'm walking with this guy, I saw the other one, and he smiled at me, and I just kind of turned and went and walked with him. And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just messing around. What are you doing? He's like, nothing. And I said, well, where are you going? He's like, I don't know. Why? And I'm like, well, let's go do something. And I remember getting in the car with him, and we're driving around, and I'll keep it G-rated, but we messed around a little bit. And as we did, we were back at his place, and I remember him saying, or he remembers me saying, just don't let them hurt me. Don't let them hurt me. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was psychotic, and I started crying, and he said, I tell you what, why don't we just go for a ride? And we did. And I remember driving around Highland Park with this guy and holding his hand, and he just let me cry, and we were talking. And I remember him saying, like, I've been sober for 25 years. And so I do know what it's like, and I'm going to give you my number. And I am married to this guy now. We've been together since probably 2011 is when we really started to date. But Jeff pulled me into the program. And it was that compassion that he had as we were driving around. And it was like the first time someone wanted to talk to me and not just like take advantage of me or me take advantage of them and run away. And he gave me his phone number. And I remember like I stayed in contact with him I'd stayed in contact with him. And I remember I had to call my parents, and I called Jeff and I said, hey, do you want to help me call my parents? And this is the first time I can honestly say, like, I feel like God kind of stepped in because I was so scared to do it. And I always, like, one of the things I did is I never wanted my phone and my battery to be connected because I knew everyone could follow me that way. So I always had the back of my phone was off, and I would put my battery in quick enough to make a call, and then I'd take it apart and I'd carry them in different pockets. And I remember like I'd switch phones over and over and over, and the phone started ringing, and it was a 320 area code, and I realized that that's my parents' number in Minnesota. And I answered the phone and just started crying, and I realized, like, how did they have my number? And I can probably put two and two together now, but back then it was like they never knew that new number. How did they have my number? How did they call me on the day I needed to call them? And I remember my mom saying, Mike? And I said, yeah. And she's like, are you okay? And I just started crying. And the very next day, Jeff picked me up, let me sleep on his couch. My parents showed up the next day. They drove from Minnesota to get me. And I remember having dinner with my parents that night and Jeff, and I just, you know how scared you are that first night of getting sober. I mean, I remember it so clearly. And my parents took me home to Minnesota for about a month and a half, and I really had time to like clean up my life. And some of the things I had to do was like one of the lies I had going on is I kept telling everyone, like, I'm not doing drugs. It's because I have AIDS. And I used to say it's affecting my brain. And I use that at work. I use that everywhere. So if I was getting in trouble, I'm like, you can't do that. There's HIPAA laws against this. And I just knew enough to say stupid things like that until I had lost my job. And I remember telling my parents, like, I have HIV. And my parents were so scared that they took me to have like blood work done when I got there because I had never had medication. And I can remember, like, this is fucked up. I remember praying that I had HIV because I had been lying for so long. I didn't want to have to tell them the truth. And, yay, I had it. I don't know what to say, but I'm like, I think about it now and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so crazy. But I remember finding out I had HIV and feeling relieved because I've been living this lie for so long. Anyway, I lived there for a while and moved back to Dallas. And as soon as I got back to Dallas, I'll tell you, it was about like 2 weeks and I had a couple of relapses. And my very last relapse, I will tell you, was we were going to a chili cook-off, AA chili cook-off over at the other church. And I can remember being nervous to go to it. So to be frank, I did a booty bump and went to the chili cook-off. And so I was sitting there like high as a kite at the chili cook-off. Didn't want to act like anything was wrong, but I remember the speaker getting up from the AA meeting and walking up front and starting to speak. And as he did, Jeff was at the table and Jeff got up to walk away. And his wife got up to breastfeed, and I was like right there, and I was the only person at the table, and I felt like he was talking directly to me. And honestly, it's the last night that I can really remember like using and having some ramifications. And when we arrived home, I told Jeff that I had been using. And I had a slip after that just once, but that's really like, that's when I knew like the gig was kind of up, because there was no more like lying about it. Like I knew that every time I had any problems, I would turn to drugs or alcohol. And every time that like, you know, I don't know. It's just like you could talk about all these stories over and over and over. But what I realized is like, I just never really got honest about what my life was like. And I can remember going into treatment here, and it was outpatient treatment. And I remember feeling like finally I fit in somewhere. And I remember like doing treatment like a good kid, like wanting to be that perfect kid. So I did it really as good as I could. And I could see all my other friends like relapsing and I wasn't relapsing. And it's not that I was better than them, but I wanted this. And, I picked a sponsor right away that I thought would be able to help me. And he was great. And I started working some steps, and I started to go to like treatment centers, and I started helping like at Homeward Bound, and slowly but surely I just started working the steps. And you could tell me anything you wanted to before this. Like, I did not think working 12 steps would actually work. There's no way. But as I was getting sober, like sitting there and talking to someone about the reality of like what my life really was like, it changed everything. And I can remember at like 30 days sober thinking, well, if you can get to 60 days sober, then you can do a little bit of drugs, or you can go have some drinks, like just a little bit. And I remember getting to 60 days and being on a different step and thinking like, well, you're now going to treatment centers. So maybe like just keep going to treatment centers and going to meetings, but that's an option if you want it. And it's so weird to think that back then, but I think that's when we talk about one day at a time. And I realized how important it really is, especially those first, the first year, the first 2 years. I still think that I was going to work the 12 steps and then I would be kind of normal. And my first sponsor, I had a sponsor for like 2 weeks at one time. And he said, what will your life be like in 5 years when you're returned to normal? And I said, well, I won't need AA. And he said, why is that? And I said, because I will be returned to sanity. And I mean, I firmly believe that. I wanted the consequences to go away, but I really didn't want to quit drinking. I didn't want to quit using. Like I found fun in that. And I think back about like my friends, every one of my friends that I had drank or did drugs. I mean, every one of them. And so I thought my life is going to be so boring. And when I came in here, I was terrified at first. I seem rather social now because I know everyone. But if I don't know a group, I am super quiet. I sit in the corner. I don't want to talk. That's just how I am. And slowly but surely, like people started to open up to me and I started to open up to them. And I realized like what we have here is so much bigger than anything I ever had out, while using. I had no intentions of getting married to Jeff. He is a wonderful person, but I remember like thinking back then, like, he's a great guy, but we're not going to get married. Like, I'm just newly sober. And then slowly but surely, like, God puts people in your lives for reasons that you don't know. And like our relationship just blew up overnight, and slowly but surely it just got better and better. And I found a lot of I wouldn't say security, but I found someone who's been in the program a long time and was compassionate with me and understood me, and I could tell him anything. And like, we just had this really great relationship, and it was something that I'd been looking for forever. And so I realized like what I wanted for a husband was probably like this crazy sex life that I had when I was using. And what I got is what God wanted me to have, which is someone that's stable and someone that is, unconditional love and honest. And it's exactly what I needed. And it's so crazy to me how much my life has changed just in the last, 12 years is a long time, but my life has just changed so much that I think back and I don't recognize who I was. Some of the big consequences were so scary to tackle. And one of the things was I just thought I would claim 9 children on my IRS for 5 years. And so I remember getting sober and realizing I have 5 years worth of claiming 9 kids. So when I finally hired someone to help me go through my wreckage, we reached out to the IRS and I owed $116,000, some crazy number. And luckily, this guy was in the program too, and he's like, "Did you have a house in there?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Did you sell it?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Did you buy another house?" "Yeah." So all of a sudden, it was just one thing opened up and another thing opened up because all I heard was $116,000. Well, then through time and like talking to the IRS and actually like explaining some things that happened and asking for a little bit of forgiveness, not like the IRS is going to forgive you, but they were a little more understanding than I expected and set up a payment plan. But my debts, what I was originally 116, ended up being like 14,000 is all I owed. So I was able to pay it off in like 4 years or something silly. That's just one thing. When I ended up getting sober in 2010, I can remember going to a doctor here for blood work after I went home for a while and finding out that I also had Hep C. And that's something I didn't expect to have because I didn't tell people I had that. So I wasn't expecting me to actually have that one. And I remember like finding this out and wanting to use my insurance, and the insurance said, no, we're not going to pay for your medication for it. And back in that time, there was a new pill that was coming out that you could take a pill and it was supposed to help you rather than like interferon or something. And the doctor, this is just God stepping in, because the doctor said to me, well, I actually just did a trial with it and we're done. And I actually have about a 6-month supply left over. And just go ahead and use this and it'll eradicate your Hep C. And it did. And the pills were $1,000 a day is what insurance was charging. Is $1,000 a day for a pill and a 6-month supply. So that's $180,000 that he just gave me. And, my Hep C was eradicated. So that's just like, that's a God moment. Building a relationship with my family is crazy. I always felt like I was so scared if my parents figured out who I was and what I was, that they wouldn't be accepting of me. And I can remember after a year of being sober, Jeff and I went on a few dates, and I remember talking to my mom and said, well, I've decided to start dating someone. And my mom said, who? And I said, well, it's Jeff. And she said, oh, thank goodness. We've been praying for that. And I said, really? She said, yeah, we've been praying every day that you would date Jeff because we think he's so great for you. And like that just built this relationship with my family that I was never expecting. So instead of being scared when they come down that they're going to figure out that I'm a fake or I'm this or that, it's like they come down and we actually enjoy time together. They enjoy time with my husband. They enjoy time with me. We're going to go visit them in South Texas later on because they bought a home in South Texas. That's something that I never expected to have, is actually have a real fun relationship with mom and dad. I can remember at about 9 months sober, though, my first thought was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this long term. And I spoke about it a little bit, and someone asked me to sponsor them. And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. And when I started sponsoring people, that is truly the first time I can say that like the cravings went away. The urge to drink went away. I was surrounding myself with people that were more like me and in the program and helping others. And, it's everything we talk about in the program is like, step 1 through 12, and 12 is, giving back and sharing your experience, strength and hope with others. And I didn't understand that all of these things that I was so ashamed of now are things that I can help others with. I'm going to be honest, like my addiction still changes all the time. And so I may not drink, I may not use, but I may not cheat on my husband, but I sure do love to eat to feel better, or I sure do love to shop. And it's really easy for me to get in these habits of like overspending. And, I had a bit of a scare. I wouldn't say a bit of a scare. In the last few years, my life's gotten really big with my job. And so all of a sudden, I don't know how to control my money. And so I'm making more money, and I'm realizing like, oh my gosh, I'm making significantly more than I've ever made before. But I just think it's okay to go spend, $3,000 in the mall on a weekend. And that is not normal, and it's not healthy, and it's just another addiction, because then I'll get home and I didn't realize it, but I'd feel like kind of sick to my stomach and like, what's wrong with me? And why am I upset about this? Or, and I realized it's just a high. Like I go buy things and I get high doing it in my head. Like, I know it sounds silly, but it's something that I talk about because 3 years ago, I was eating so much that I was up to about 240 pounds. And every time I turn around, I'd be eating nonstop. So I had to change some things in my life there. And then it turned to shopping. And then, so I realized that during the pandemic, I'm beyond grateful that I'm in a relationship because I'm confident that if I was single, I would not be sober today. And I don't know. I think it was hard for everyone, but I think it was especially hard for people that were single and in the program. Zoom was great, but it was hard. I had to be around people. So one of the things my sponsor and I and my brothers did is we'd start meeting every Saturday morning at like 10 a.m. So every Saturday we'd meet in the park during COVID. And we'd sit all, 6 feet away. And then, as everyone gets acclimated to COVID, now it's like we're getting closer and closer and closer. And slowly but surely, it's not so scary. We're vaccinated, so it doesn't mean it's better. I've been pretty good about keeping my mask on at all times. And then the last 6 months, I've really relaxed. And sure enough, about 2 weeks ago, we were shopping and I was having Jeff smell some candles. I'm like, oh, smell this candle. And he's like, I don't smell anything. I'm like, really? It's strong. I'm like, I smell this candle. And he's like, I don't smell anything. I'm like, what? So I grabbed another one. He was freaking out. And he's like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, you're not smelling anything. Do you realize what's going on? And all of a sudden he's like, oh, do you think? Well, sure enough, like we go home and do a test and he's positive. I somehow stay negative through this whole thing. I tested every day for like 10 days and I was negative the whole time. But we're just seeing more and more people and friends. Like, it's just rampant in here. It's everywhere right now, and it's so crazy. And I think it's just kind of like, it's the new norm. It's not scary to me anymore. It doesn't control my life like it did a year and a half ago. It's kind of like when I first got sober. I was so scared to do anything that was out of the norm to relapse that I just had to like stay on the straight and narrow. And slowly but surely you learn how to navigate life. And AA was that way. COVID's that way. Spending is definitely that way right now. Like I'm taking a big step back this year. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm going to go to more meetings and I'm going to think about what I need to buy before I leave my house and go shopping. And I moved Amazon to my card and I didn't realize how much I spent on Amazon because I just buy it. And all of a sudden I realized like, oh, wow, last week I spent $350 on Amazon and didn't realize it. And before I just put it on Jeff's card. So I didn't know it. But it's these little things that are like they're big aha moments in my life. And right now, like, I have a tendency to interrupt everyone when they're talking. I always think maybe what I'm saying is probably a little more important than what they're saying. So as someone's speaking, I will interrupt them. And I didn't realize I did that. And it's bugging the shit out of me now. Because I'm starting to realize like there's certain things that I do that are just not acceptable. And so it took 12 years of sobriety before I'm starting to hit some of these things that I just didn't realize were annoying. But now it's so apparent that like I annoy myself and I'm giving myself as much grace as possible. But 2022 is going to be a big year, and it's going to be big emotionally. It's going to be big spiritually. It's going to be big with work. But I feel like it's like the year for me to grow up. I'm 47, almost 48. And I feel like it's time for me to like change the way I live my life. And if I can make these little changes, not little, if I can make these huge changes in my life already, like all my past, there's no reason why I don't continue to evolve and become a better Michael in the future. And I would not have anything without this program. So, I hate to say this, but I'm really grateful that I am an alcoholic. because if I never hit rock bottom, there's no way I would be able to manage my life and run the life the way I do right now. I can remember one of the biggest things I wanted to do is I remember being 20 years old and thinking, I want to be a realtor. And my dad's like, you're too young to be a realtor. No one would take you seriously at 20. And then at 40, like my life had gone out of control. And I thought, I was sober for about 5 years by then. And I remember thinking like, if I don't make a change now, I've been sober for 5 years, I will never make the change. And I did everything I needed to do and cleaned up my past and did everything and became a realtor. In the last 7 years or 8 years, it's been just unbelievable. And those are like, money's nice, but like my life has just gotten so much easier in every aspect. And I owe it all to this program and my friends. And, I've always talked about wanting to move. And then it's like every time you think about actually wanting to move out of Dallas, where would you go? Like everything I have, my whole family is my AA family and they're all here. And I know I could move somewhere else and start a life again, but like I have everything I need. And I think God, if you sit there and listen, he's telling you to stay where you're at. Like for me, I need to stay here. So I know this story was a little sporadic tonight and I apologize, but I'm grateful I came out tonight and was able to tell my story, and I appreciate you asking me, and I think that's all I've got. Thank you.